All right, so this will be quick. Um, I'm not filming this way because it's like, oh, I got like halo of like, it's just I'm doing this really quick. Um, Thoughts that keep occurring to me like now I totally understand why we have hardships in our life and working from a multidimensional place. I now understand this. So if you're just looking at the physical world and working from the ego and its limitations, when you have a problem that presents in your life that causes you pain, you typically will harden up. And instead of truly deeply learning the lesson from an emotional standpoint, you might throw a bunch of logic at the situation and talk through it and protect yourself. And a lot of this can happen. This is how like beliefs within that solidify depression can form um, to lessen your anxieties and worries about potential next situations that will lead you in a bad situation. You'll either, again, it kind of goes back to the fight or flight. Um, but to me, for conversation's sake, if you're just working from the limited ego, third dimension, whatever you want to say, when you have a problem in your life, you're typically, at least this is what I've done, is not worked through the emotions healthily. So I would make a belief like, okay, let's say people didn't like what I did creatively and I got, laughed at, for example. Something as frivolous maybe as that, but it's actually extreme if you go to the extreme of being like, well, I'll never be creative again, or oh, I've got to do this. I got to do this like to protect myself. I have to work harder. I have to, and it's like, but then you can get down that rabbit hole of like, well, what are you working harder for? Is this really what you want to do? Instead of just sitting with the emotion, which is a feminine energy, to just kind of, which is what the world definitely lacks more than anything, is that feminine submissive energy, that reflective energy, that but there's also a nurturing of the divine masculine. I think that's that fatherly figure of knowing exactly what to say, when to say it. And so when you're working from that ego limitation, you're not accessing that. You're not processing the real emotions. You might be processing some emotions, but it might be getting you stuck in a cycle that you keep getting, you don't learn the lesson. Whereas when you're working multidimensionally, which I'm learning what that is now, I'm naturally feeling that split within myself. So the split of letting those emotions play out as much as I can, creating an environment like a sandbox for my three-dimensional self to play in, but realizing on a higher dimension, being forgiving of what happens, um, being a listener. I think that's like the feminine energy would be to listen, but the masculine energy of doing something appropriate, um, doing something that really nurtures my soul. And I have this better in my head. It's harder to explain, but that is how you stop that cycle. And I think that that's why I do have problems in my life, but interestingly, I do look back and I go, a lot of the times it is new problems. And it's because my experience on earth is to learn from these problems. So if I don't learn from a problem, it will present itself. But I do find that once I learn that problem, and a lot of it is one taking responsibility for whatever happens, because again, it does happen on a soul level. That on a soul level, you are responsible for everything that's happening. And that's not this weird Stockholm syndrome situation where you're just having to uh take that responsibility when it's not yours. But on a soul level, once you recognize that, that breaks the cycle. Then you have access to so many other thoughts and emotions that are so empowering. So yeah, it's actually empowering to take responsibility. um I was gonna rattle off some other things, but so yeah, I was kind of saying, if you don't learn the lessons, you'll keep repeating the problem. And if you keep going, woe is me, and you keep acting like you don't know why these problems keep happening, and you have to just look at yourself for the answer. But if you don't look at yourself for the answer and pull yourself out of it, you will keep getting that problem. So I notice that I get new problems presented now. It is like a school. I hate when people say, I don't want to say I hate, I don't like when people say that Earth is a school, because then it trivializes to me the experience of Earth, of just, but see, that's living in those both dimensions, you could say. Um, it's a school on a higher level, on a higher dimension, on this third dimensional plane that we have to play out still. We're not above it. If we still have a physical, if we're limited still by our physical body, we should say, um, then those energies have to play out. And so we are having to balance learning things but enjoying things at the same time, which is hard to do. So, and I'm realizing the split of being able to simultaneously live in those dimensions and those spaces. So, um, that's all I wanted to say for now. I got to stop because I'll ramble.